Hello, today we are moving on to revising psychopathology. So what you'll need this lesson is your year 1 textbook, something to write with, and also if you have flashcards, that would be amazing. If you don't, then you can either use some post-it notes if you've got some of those, or you can just cut up some paper and use those as flashcards. So your first task, I want you to get a big piece of paper for this and draw this table out, because it'll be a very handy revision tool for you to have. Because obviously these are the 3 things that we look at in psychopathology, depression, phobias and OCD, and examiners love asking about the emotional, cognitive and behavioural characteristics of each of these disorders. So what I want you to do is, once you've copied the table, I want you to try and fill in as much as you can without looking in your textbook, and then go back after you've looked in your textbook and add it with a different coloured pen. Or you might want to do it in rough first and then copy it all out in neat once you've looked in your textbook. Okay, so let's start creating some flashcards then. I want you to write these questions on the front of your flashcards, and then on the back, try without your textbook first, try and write down as much as you can remember, and then go back to your textbook and fill in the rest. And these will be really, really handy to have just before an exam, to test your knowledge and to test each other's knowledge. And yeah, so pause me now and then we'll go through the answers. What does it mean when behaviour is described as deviating from social norms? So society has all of these unwritten rules about how we should behave and act in certain situations, and anything that's against that is considered abnormal. What does failure to function adequately mean with regards to abnormal behaviour? This is anything that prohibits someone from carrying out daily tasks, so getting up in the morning, getting dressed, having a shower, brushing your teeth, etc. And so if you don't do these behaviours, that's considered abnormal if it gets in the way of daily tasks like employment or education. What does statistical frequency mean with regards to abnormal behaviour? This is any behaviour that's very rare, so it's only seen in very few people. And in the case of depression, for example, that's not actually an example of statistical infrequency, because depression is actually quite common. What does deviation from ideal mental health mean with regards to abnormal behaviour? So what they do is they first create this criteria of what ideal mental health looks like. And ideal mental health is having a positive view of yourself, being able to form good relationships, being able to grow, and this process of self-development. And if someone is unable to do these things, then they are said to be deviating from ideal mental health. What is the name of the list of mental disorders that and their characteristics that is used to diagnose mental disorders? And this is the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. What is cultural relativism? It's the view that behaviour cannot be judged unless it's viewed in the context of the culture in which it originates. And it's something that we looked at when we did issues and debates. And cultural relativism is one that we can talk about not just in psychopathology, but in a lot of our other topics. Your next 2 questions: what is the 2-process model, and what is systematic desensitization? Pause me and have a go at making those 2 flashcards. Okay, the 2-process model is based on the behaviourist approach, and it explains how we develop phobias. So firstly, a phobia is developed through classical conditioning. So through associative learning, we learn to be scared of something. So we encounter a dog, the dog bites us, we now have a fear of dogs. However, this doesn't explain why a phobia would be maintained, because every time you see a dog, it doesn't bite you. So therefore, the 2-process model suggests that they're created through classical conditioning, but then they're maintained through operant conditioning, specifically negative reinforcement. If we're scared of something, we'll actively seek to avoid it. Like, I hate scary movies, so whenever you're watching telly and an advert comes in for a scary film, I'll hide, and the fact that I hide reduces my anxiety. So by avoiding something that I'm scared of, it creates this reinforcement. It's getting rid of something negative, so anxiety or fear. What is systematic desensitization? It's a form of behavioural therapy. So it's based on the fact that phobias are learned through associative learning. And what the therapist does is it tries to dissociate stimulus from response. So firstly, the client is taught relaxation techniques, and then the client with the therapist will create a hierarchy, and it will start with the least scary thing. So picture a spider, okay, and then eventually the hierarchy will get scarier and scarier, and they work through this hierarchy while practicing these relaxation techniques until hopefully anxiety is completely extinguished. Next two questions: what is flooding, and what is the negative triad, and who developed it? Flooding is the second form of behavioural therapy that we looked at to treat phobias. It also treats anxiety disorders. So you take something that you're really, really scared of, and you are exposed to it in a relaxed sort of manner. So you are usually with a therapist, and if you haven't watched it, you should YouTube "woman is scared to death of clowns" or something like that. But it's like quite a retro video, but it's quite enlightening and a little bit traumatic. It's the video, I know I've shown at least one of your classes where the clown comes in and the woman just freaks out and drops her teddy. But yeah, YouTube that. It's quite a good watch, and it explains flooding quite well. What is the negative triad and who developed it? So the negative triad is how the cognitive approach explains depression, and it's all to do with our schemas. So we have a negative view about the self, so I'm worthless. We have a negative view about the world, everybody's against me, everybody hates me. And we have a negative view about the future. So this situation is never going to improve because I'm useless and the future is dark and miserable, etc. And it was developed by Beck. Next two questions: what is the ABC model and who developed it? And what is cognitive behavioural therapy? So the ABC model is another explanation from the cognitive approach to explain depression, and it basically focuses on irrational beliefs, on emotions. So A stands for activating event, so whatever triggered the depression in the first place. B is for belief, so this is the irrational thought part, and then C, the consequence of these irrational beliefs. And it was developed by Ellis. And cognitive behavioural therapy is based on the ABC model. In particular, it focuses on the B bit, and it tries to change these negative beliefs and this irrational thinking in order to hopefully have better consequences for the patient. How do you describe irrational thoughts, and what is the genetic explanation of OCD? So irrational thoughts are thoughts that aren't based on facts or logic. They're usually quite disheartening thoughts, and sometimes even dangerous. Irrational thinking is rigid and it's unrealistic, and it's usually like quite extreme, like, oh, if I mess up once, that means I'm completely incompetent and everybody's going to hate me, or if someone criticises me, I just must be the worst person in the world. So that's what cognitive behavioural therapy tries to improve, are these irrational thoughts. What is the genetic explanation of OCD? So it's all to do with diathesis, so this genetic vulnerability to acquire certain genes from our parents, and that can lead to OCD. Two examples are the COMT gene, which is linked to the production of dopamine, and then the SERT gene, which is linked to the transport of serotonin around the brain. Outline diathesis stress as an explanation of OCD, and what is the neural explanation for OCD? So as I just mentioned, diathesis is having this genetic vulnerability, and it's to do with our genes, so specifically the COMT gene and the SERT gene. If our parents pass that gene down to us, then we have more of a genetic vulnerability to acquire OCD. However, there also has to be the stress part of the diathesis stress. So these are environmental factors that can also cause OCD. And as twin studies show, OCD does not have 100% concordance rates, therefore there must be some environmental factors having an effect on the development of OCD. What is the neural explanation for OCD? So this is all to do with our neurotransmitters. It's high levels of dopamine and low levels of serotonin. And you have to be careful in an exam when they ask you for genetic explanations, because genetic explanations do link with neurotransmitters, because the COMT gene and the SERT gene affect dopamine and serotonin. If you get asked about the neural explanations, do not mention genes, just mention these neurotransmitters. And evidence of this comes from drug therapy, where drugs that balance out the dopamine and serotonin levels help effectively treat OCD. Next to, what is dopamine and what is serotonin, and which drugs increase levels of serotonin? So dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters are sometimes referred to as chemical messengers because they literally send messages between nerve cells. And dopamine is specifically important for motivation, drive, focus, pleasure, so keeping things interesting, and too much or too little of it can have a vast range of health issues. What is serotonin and which drugs increase levels of serotonin? Serotonin again is a neurotransmitter, and serotonin is very important for our mood, our emotion, our sleep, aggression, eating behaviour, lots and lots of things. And SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, increase the levels of serotonin in the brain. And they're usually used to treat depression alongside CBT. And how they work is, so when serotonin has carried a message in between nerve cells, then it's usually reabsorbed by the nerve cell, and this is known as reuptake. SSRIs, when you're taking them, they block the reuptake, which means that more serotonin is then available to pass further messages between the nearby nerve cells. So higher levels in the brain are thought to treat depression. And the last questions that I want you to answer for today's lesson is, what is Gaba and which drugs enhance the activity of Gaba? And what is noradrenaline and which drugs prolong the activity of noradrenaline? So Gaba is an inhibitory neurotransmitter because it inhibits certain brain signals and decreases activity in our nervous systems. So it acts as a natural form of anxiety reduction. Benzodiazepine enhances the activity of Gaba, basically increases the effect of this chemical in the brain, and it kind of acts as a sedative, and it can treat things like rational thought, memory, emotions, but also essential functions such as breathing, which helps reduce anxiety. What is noradrenaline and which drugs prolong the activity of noradrenaline? Noradrenaline is another neurotransmitter, and it's the main neurotransmitter in the sympathetic nerves in the cardiovascular system, which means that it's in charge of blood pressure and heart rate. Tricyclics are the type of antidepressant that prolong activity of noradrenaline, and they work in the same way as SSRIs. So they prevent the reuptake of the neurotransmitter, which means that there's more available to circulate in your brain, which means a reduction in symptoms of whatever disorder you are experiencing. So that is it for today's lesson. Please take a picture of the work that you've done and upload it onto Teams, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you very soon.